The Triad region remains one of North Carolina's most attractive housing markets, offering a perfect blend of affordability, quality of life, and economic opportunity. As you consider purchasing a home in 2025, the Sharp Mortgage Team is ready to help. With median home prices significantly lower than the national average, first-time homebuyers and families continue to find excellent value in the Triad. And with programs like NC Housing Financing Down Payment Assistance, your new home may be more affordable than you think. Or if your holiday bills have been stacking up, the Sharp Mortgage Team can help you consolidate your debts and put you on a successful road in 2025. Call them today and they'll advise you on the best strategy. Call Ashley and the folks at the Sharp Mortgage Team at 336-575-9448 today for a no-obligation conversation that could be your best decision all year.
This is the Triad Podcast Network.
I'm Algenon Cash, and you're locked in. Every week, I try to curate a conversation with a leader in our community to talk about what's happening right here in your backyard so that you can stay up to speed with whatever's happening in business and public policy, the community, and the economy at large. And this week, I've got the executive director of Love Out Loud, Chuck Spong, is locking in with me for the first time, and he's going to help us understand what's happening with our nonprofits right here in Winston-Salem. Chuck, thank you for locking in, man. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's good to talk to you.
Yes, sir. You as well. I do think this is your first appearance on the Locked In Show, so welcome. I'm sure my audience will get a lot from this conversation and learn a lot more about you, Love Out Loud, and some of the incredible work that you all are doing here in Winston-Salem. For my audience, Chuck, before we get started, why don't you just help them understand what Love Out Loud is, how it came to form, and some of the work that you all do?
Sure. We trace our origins to a big party for our city that's called Christmas for the City. Back in 2008, I was at a large church producing their big production, and we were given the freedom to look at that differently. So rather than necessarily doing a big program, how else could we mark the moment of Christmas? And so we came up with a concept that was to throw a party and invite other churches to join with us. And then eventually we also engaged nonprofits and the like. And so it became a shared experience, a shared goal that brought together people across all kinds of lines of differences. And we just began to build relationally towards the event. And part of the nature of the event is that people can show up as they are, stylistically, theologically, with all of our beautiful diversity of gifts and differences. And yet we can still have this cohesive moment where the city comes together. 2008 was when that started. 2010 is when we did 30 days of serving that was called Love Out Loud, that began to push that out a little bit more, that instead of not only doing 3 nights down at the Millennium Center, we wanted to serve our community for 30 days with an eye towards what that might look like year round. And that just began to hit, both in terms of helping volunteers find meaningful places to serve across the whole continuum of work in our community, as well as just engaging one another, the partners in the work, and looking for ways to collaborate in alignment. And so we just have continued to do that. We've got coming up on 18 years of relationship and trust building in the community. Kind of before things got a little dicey around 15 and 16, when we began to kind of, fragment a bit and have some strong differences of opinion, and what is it going to look like for us to engage with one another. Well, we had a bit of a runway to say, no matter how we believe or think differently or vote differently, the issue transcends a lot of that. So if I care about the work of housing, let's get in it together, no matter where we stand from a faith perspective or partisan perspective. And so we've just continued to do that. About in 18 or 19, we really began to push into moving beyond what you might call acts of service or compassion and mercy to, like, what are the root causes of some of the ways we serve in our food pantries or in our homeless shelters? What are the things that cause that and that are in need of addressing? And in nonprofit world, we call that systems change. And so we just began to wrestle with that and other issues that were really plaguing our community conversations, and to invite space for people to really engage one another. And so we continue to do that with an eye also towards addressing policy and advocacy that would change the conditions on the ground that yield all this need for lots of volunteer work.
Chuck, I had no idea you all had been around 18 years.
Yeah.
I think you and I actually came into each other's awareness maybe like shortly before COVID, just a few years before COVID. So I had no idea the history went so far back. I'm very familiar with Christmas for the City. I think that is one of the great grand events that our community puts on. If you have not been to Christmas for the City, I think it starts what, Chuck? It's every December at the Bent Convention Center.
Yeah, I think we're gonna retool it a bit. So we may stay at the convention center, we may go to the fairgrounds, but we're gonna take the same concept of bringing the city together in all of its beautiful diversity to celebrate a shared experience and to be very inclusive of people no matter where they're at. And so that those values hold true, even as the shape of it may look a little differently. But yeah, mid to late December, mid to right up against Christmas, somewhere right in that range.
Well, for my audience, I know you've got a long time to prepare because it's the start of the new year, but
Mhm.
look for this event at the end of the year, Christmas for the City. It's a great opportunity to come together as a community, as one, and you have an opportunity to see and meet your neighbors, oftentimes people that might not look or sound like you, all convening, all coming together at one event. And I think just the diversity of that event is significant. Now, Chuck, I heard you say that I guess Love Out Loud was born out of a Christian organization or within the church. However, I think the nonprofits that you work with on a day-to-day basis are not all necessarily Christian-based nonprofits. What is the day-to-day at Love Out Loud look like?
Well, so probably a couple of statements we tend to make that it might be helpful for people. Love Out Loud at its core are a bunch of people walking in the way of Jesus to love God and neighbor. And we link arms with anyone working for the thriving of our community. Like when we work on hunger or on issues of immigration or education, those are universal and human needs and concerns. And no matter where you are from a faith perspective, we can link arms to address those things as a community. And so that's our firm belief that even as we bring a pretty Jesus-centered way of doing things, we will work with anybody that has a passion for an area. And in fact, we'll often have more subject matter expertise than what, full-time, Christian vocational pastors might, if you will. And so we bring who we are to that table, and we link up with others that would be concerned about those same things.
So I recall working with Love Out Loud during COVID. Love Out Loud had received a fairly significant grant from the city of Winston-Salem to provide meals to essential workers. My organization, Eat, Drink, Triad, along with the Urban League, got involved with that, along with countless other organizations that were all a part of that campaign and that effort. I would say, Chuck, during that experience, I started to see Love Out Loud as more of a convener.
That's right.
Love Out Loud wasn't necessarily the one that was fully executing on the grant, but certainly had won the grant and then started to organize a lot of organizations underneath to execute on the work. Would that be the accurate way to describe Love Out Loud as more of a convener?
For certainly. A convener, a connector, an activator. I think Malcolm Gladwell talks about a maven, like people who have their ear to the ground. We tend to be in relationship to enough people that we've got a lot of intel on how things go down here in our community. And we're pretty agile. We're a small team that will adapt to the current circumstances. All those things came to bear when we all suddenly had to shift our way of doing and being. And I don't know that life is too different in this current moment that there's just some radical change happening, and we kind of sit in a place that has trust across a lot of lines of difference, and are committed to being collaborative in what does that look like from here on out. So yeah, during that time we were doing the thing with the food. If you remember, there's a whole Mass the City thing where we engaged some of our partners and invited any other partners in that effort. We worked with 192 nonprofits, faith organizations, and neighborhood associations to distribute 70,000 masks. We are not mask experts at that point. We were not distribution, gurus. We just had a network of people that had some amount of trust with us, and then we added others that wanted to join us, and that's kind of what we just do, as our function in the city. Yeah, certainly conveners, connectors, activators, and I probably would add these days co-conspirators.
You used the word maven a moment ago as someone that sort of keeps their ear to the ground and knows what's going on within the community. A lot of changes have happened in Winston-Salem pre-COVID, during COVID, after COVID. Talk a little bit about sort of the state of the nonprofit community. What are some challenges that our nonprofits are facing that maybe the ordinary person like myself and those within my audience would be unaware of?
Yeah. Well, I think they would be aware of, boy, there's an awful lot of nonprofits doing an awful lot of things, and they don't seem to be super coordinated. And so, but what they might not be aware of is, the nonprofits in the way they have to like exist and move are often fighting for funding and trying to show proof of concept and measure the things. And for the most part, you end up with your head down and not being able to look out around the landscape. And so when people wonder, well, why isn't that work more aligned? Why isn't it more effective? Well, some of it's the reality of how our nonprofits have to seek funding and have capacity to work with one another. And frankly, a lot of them get into the work and they are passionate about the work. And suddenly you also have to manage a nonprofit. And those are two distinctly different gears. And so a lot of our efforts are towards alignment. Like, how do we help all the people working on housing? Like, we are not a top-down command and control entity, but we are working to say, hey, do you know about those people over there? Hey, there's a housing conversation coming up later this month that the Piedmont Triad Regional Council is doing, and we'll make introductions, we'll connect dots, and we'll work towards bringing people together to figure out how they could more effectively address these problems. That's probably the most fundamental thing that's happening. And then, and certainly the ground is shifting on even ways we have, been able to fund the things we do and how we do them. And that's certainly a big part of the conversation right now, and people working for some of the most marginalized members of our community.
When the weather warms up, so does the real estate market. Sounds obvious, right? It's true. Spring typically means more home sales. But how will the current interest rates affect people's decisions? What about inventory? Is it high or low? And does that benefit the buyer or the seller? And how do those factors take into account a certain price point or area of the triad? Now it's not so obvious, is it? That's why you should turn to the Ginther Group to make sense of it all. You need someone you can rely on to assess your situation, read the data and trends, and point you in the right direction. Interest rates, inventory, even new construction. There are so many factors that impact our local market. And you should get your information from the folks right here in our backyard. Contact Blake Ginther and the Ginther Group today, 336-283-8689, or visit theginthergroup.com. Buying, selling, investing, or just learning. Whatever you need, start now. And like me, you can become a Ginther Group client for life.
Life is full of celebrations, birthdays, holidays, life milestones, and so much more. And who has been helping generations of families celebrate these events? Our friends at Dewey's Bakery. And even if you aren't planning for something in the near future, you don't have to wait to enjoy something savory and delicious from Dewey's. Maybe you just need something to get you through your Mondays. Drop by every Monday for a free Cake Square Day. No purchase necessary. Just come celebrate the start of a new week. So, if you're hearing this ad on a Monday and you're in your car, reset that GPS and get to one of their 3 Triad locations immediately in Winston-Salem at Thruway and Renolda Manor, plus one in Greensboro at Friendly Shopping Center. And any day of the week, you can find the perfect item with fast and easy ordering options at local.deweys.com. Plus, Dewey's does so much to help celebrate our community. To date, They've given back over $4 million to local schools, churches, and other nonprofits. Your next celebration isn't complete without something special from Dewey's Bakery. Dewey's. Celebrate every day.
You talk about the number of nonprofits in the community, and I'm one of those that, I'm wondering sometimes, like, does Winston-Salem need another nonprofit? And I'm going to sort of turn that question to you,
Yeah,
Chuck.
I
I
love
mean,
that question.
someone who's sitting in my audience today that's listening to this conversation and they're passionate about something they want to do in the community. They may be thinking about forming their own nonprofit to go out and do that. Do we absolutely need another nonprofit in our city?
We need more people doing good in our city. Do we need to add another organization? Maybe not. And I get that question. You're being on pastoral staff at a large church. People would approach me after service to say, no one's doing X, or is anyone working on Y? And part of the Maven role is I could usually say, oh, let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about that. And so I guess step number one is like really survey the landscape before you dive in with something new. Like you would do that as a business. Like who is up to what, and is there, do they already have a corner on the market? You would do your research if you started a business. And I think sometimes nonprofits, we don't. We just dive in. We see an urgent need and don't take the time to do some legit R&D. And so that's one of the challenges. We serve as fiscal sponsors of efforts and to kind of head that off a bit to use our infrastructure and our
Hmm.
nonprofit systems so that about 20 things on our umbrella don't have to be 20 more nonprofits. And so there's a way also to and those 20 initiatives can focus on like what they got in the business to do, if you will, not on doing their 990s and doing an audit and carrying liability insurance and overseeing a board and closing their books. So there can be an alignment of the infrastructure. But I mean, you can't look at the stats of Forsyth County with the childhood hunger rate and the poverty rate and economic mobility and think, well, we don't need any more help around here. But the way that we work together and work smart is in need of dialogue and addressing.
If you're just now joining the conversation, I'm Algenon Cash. I'm your host. Thank you for locking in. The other voice you hear with me today is Chuck Spong, who is the executive director of Love Out Loud. And we're talking about the nonprofits right here in Winston-Salem, here in our backyard. And I hear what you're saying loud and clear, Chuck. I think what you're saying is the needs are certainly there. We've lots of needs that we all need to be addressing through passion and our compassion. However, do we need a completely new organization to do that? That might be questionable. So, for some of you in my audience that's listening today, and you might be passionate about something that's happening right here in your backyard, I love the way Chuck talked about do your research and do your homework. Find out first if there's an organization that's already out there that's serving the need that you care so much about before you rush out and form a new nonprofit that's now competing with the nonprofits that are already in your backyard, all competing for a scarce amount of financial resources. And I want to talk about that, Chuck. I mean, it seems like when I talk to nonprofits today, more and more are crying the blues in terms of being able to get access to financial resources.
Sure.
I know here in Winston-Salem, we've seen somewhat of an exodus of a lot of large companies that makes it much harder for nonprofits to raise money. What's your advice to nonprofits out there that are, everybody's trying to feed from the same trough, and it's a little bit less to go around day by day?
Well, I'd actually argue with the premise that there's less to go around. Yeah, it's there's some shifts in funding. The large corporate entities that would fund, the work of, say, a United Way, that is definitely has shifted. But the amount of wealth in our community, is extraordinary. And so I think don't necessarily unlock that, engage that. Um, uh, in ways that that could be more effective, frankly. And so part of our work is to help kind of match donors and their passions. I mean, we're not in the business of donor advisement, but we are in the business of, helping our community understand what's happening around here and how that might align with who they are and what they have a passion for. And again, back to people that start nonprofits, not only you're trying to do the work and manage a nonprofit, but you're also trying to do donor engagement and volunteer engagement. And that's a bunch of stuff to do in addition to the pure task of what you felt called to do. And so then we don't. I mean, I guess I have a strong belief that there is an incredible amount of latent funding and of human resource that goes untapped because people never find the thing that they feel most passionate about. They can be doing something that's incredibly meaningful that their church or their business or their civic organization is doing, but it may not tap into the deepest part of who they are. And so, they kind of skim along. And if we could, part of our work is trying to help people really match their passion and what they feel is the most important need, which, it's most important to that person. I don't think you can rank the most important needs in our city. They're all very intertwined. But if we could help match both volunteers and donors more effectively to good work, that would be a part of unlocking some of the potential that goes untapped.
Yeah, I like that comment you just made. I want to stay there for a moment because you're right. And I'm not sure until I just heard you say all this that I paused long enough to think about it this way. But you're right. There is an incredible amount of wealth in our community and in our city. And I have often said that I think everyone in the city wants to do good. I think everybody in the city wants to support the initiatives that are most important to the community. But oftentimes they may not understand how to do it, or they don't necessarily trust the organizations that are doing the work because they didn't go to high school with the executive director, or that board member didn't go to Wake Forest, so they don't have that connection there. How do we start to really overcome some of those kind of barriers and obstacles that you're talking about? Because I think you're hitting on something that's really, really critical right now.
Well, I would always say relationship like that, and showing up, frankly. And so there are all kinds of community conversations that introduce people to work that's happening. We certainly relish being that bridging agent for sure. And we try and lift up, like I mentioned, I alluded to work in housing. Well, in 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, Piedmont, as an example, Piedmont Triad Regional Council in the city of Winston is doing a big housing summit down at the Benton. Well, that's a great place for someone who has some interest in housing to show up and like be in the civic discourse about those things and meet others that are doing that. So a part of it is literally leaning in and engaging. Now, it can be tough to find out who's talking about what, and so we try and help with that. We try and broadcast and amplify community conversations that become pathways to engagement for people. But that's a part of, just in general, it's tough to track with everything going on, and so we try and be an agent of communications for people to find a way into a conversation that would be deeply meaningful to them.
Now, if someone that's listening and leads a nonprofit here in Winston-Salem and they wanted to engage with you all, I believe y'all have a weekly breakfast that you do at Cranky's. Talk a little bit about that community conversation that you host.
Probably, I want to say, I was looking at some pictures the other day, like 2011 is about as far back as it goes, that every Thursday morning, when Cranky's used to be about an eighth the square footage as it is right now, it was just this tiny place before biotech was open and all that. We've been meeting on Thursday mornings at 8 a.m. To build relationally and to share what we're all doing and watch for ways that we could connect dots. And so back to your question of, well, how do people kind of enter the space? Well, that's it. Like just show up and build relationally many times across lines of difference and be a student of what's happening. And so we try and do that on Thursday mornings. And that's an open time. It's very casual. And there's both people that are regulars and people that happen to walk through for a cup of coffee, that we kind of lean into the serendipitousness of just being in the public space. And that's helpful to both intentional and unanticipated conversations that happen. So we're down there from 8 a.m. to 9:30 every Thursday. That's that's an easy way just to have a conversation about what people are thinking and feeling and wanting to know more about.
Now, Chuck, do y'all require any kind of pre-registration to attend? You just sort of drop in and hang out, or?
Yep. Yep. Just very casual, very. I mean, we even shot a video in Crankies in 2019 called "One Cup of Coffee," and it's towards the idea of, a lot of our work is built in conversation, dialogue, and relationship to one another, and so yeah, we're a big believer in just being present and engaged with one another.
Now, someone that's already in the nonprofit space, do y'all provide? I heard you talk about some of the administrative support that you provide folks that might be passionate about an issue. What about training? I mean, someone that wants to start a nonprofit, maybe you just can't convince them, Chuck, not to start that next nonprofit. Do you guys help them out with any kind of training at all?
For the most part, no. I mean, if they become one of our fiscally sponsored projects, there is some amount of coaching that's kind of built in, because of the interaction and all that. But we would quickly point them to Hands-On Northwest North Carolina as more of the subject matter expert. They develop curriculum and guides and all kinds of things, and so we certainly don't want to duplicate that. And frankly, that's a whole body of work that we don't necessarily feel called to. Again, we also have this advantage of hands-on, really doing that, at a very expert level. And so we would more walk alongside folks, be a source of encouragement and intel. But as far as like, and we're happy to share what we learn. But as far as like just the rigorous kind of training and understanding that you need, we point in that direction.
It's time to get serious about your financial future. It's never too early, but it could be too late to get started. And that's oftentimes the hardest part, getting started. How much do I save? Where do I invest? Do I save for college or retirement? How much for each? And who do I talk to about it all? Okay, we'll keep things simple for now and help you answer the last one. We recommend you begin with a local financial advisor, and that's Jennifer Johnson of Three Magnolias Financial Advisors. She'll sit down with you for a complimentary introductory consultation and go over all of your questions. Get started on the path to achieving your financial goals. Visit threemagnoliasfinancialadvisors.com or call 336-701-1600. Get comfortable with your financial future. Three Magnolias Financial Advisors, retirement, financial planning, and investments. Securities offered through Private Client Services, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Three Magnolias Financial Advisors. Three Magnolias Financial Advisors and Private Client Services are not affiliated. Private Client Services is under separate ownership from any other named entity.
If you just now joined in the conversation, my name is Algenon Cash. I'm your host. You are locked in with me. The other voice that you hear today is Chuck Spong, who's the executive director of Love Out Loud. And we're just talking about some of the resources that are available to our nonprofits right here in Winston-Salem. Chuck, I'm moving into a phase where I got to wrap up here soon. A moment ago at the outset of our conversation, you talked about some of the work that you all are doing in the immigration space. I know with this current new administration that's come in, a lot of the things that we're talking about today around diversity and equity and inclusion, those things are being made less important. As well as we're seeing a huge onslaught, I guess you can describe, against our immigrant community or our migrant community. Winston-Salem has a significant immigrant community. What are you hearing from some of the nonprofits that you work with in terms of that part of our community that they serve?
Yeah, maybe I can kind of carve out immigration and then talk more broadly. Yeah, certainly. And the way we're portraying it is shifts in federal policy and funding are materially impacting folks that have immigrated here. And it's not even just ones with undocumented status. That entire community, these are their friends. These are our friends and our neighbors, and so the level of fear and uncertainty is palpable. I was in a meeting with the school district, and they're getting. I mean, they are having high rates of absenteeism from fear of kids showing up. And while we don't have any reports of people being deported directly from schools, that is the tenor of the feel in the community. And so you can argue with people however you want to about how this is playing out. The pure emotional uncertainty is very dramatic. And based on just messaging that is being sent, we do have to figure out how are we going to move and respond as a community. So we're involved in that conversation. In a more broad sense, these shifts at the federal level have material impact on the way that we do things, and who we are as a community. And so it's highly likely that other kinds of funding that has been kind of the staple, for example, to undergird Title I lunches. Like if we go after Department of Ed, well, Title I lunches is in that bucket, as is Pell Grants, as is a number of things that affect many, many people, not just those other people. And so we just try and, on a local level, try and convene groups to figure out, well, who are we going to be as a community? No matter what's happening up there, we have got to recalibrate and we have to care for one another. And again, going back to our mission of loving God and neighbor, as we feel called to do, I don't know how we cannot be involved in that conversation, and so we are deeply.
You and I both agree that capital is the lifeblood of any company, whether it's for profit or nonprofit.
Right.
When you heard the federal government had, at least for a moment, had paused any kind of federal payments to nonprofits and so many others, did you hear from any specific nonprofits in Winston-Salem? Was there a reaction here in our own
my
community?
goodness. Yeah. And I don't, the general sense is that has been paused. And again, from all signals that are being sent, that we're wanting to dramatically reduce the size of federal government. Well, sure, let's take a clear-eyed look at things, but do we want to cut that deeply that literally lives and destinies will be changed in this moment? And these are people we know and love. And so what are we called to do in a moment when things that have been a part of supporting them and their reality? Well, we got stuff to figure out.
Here's my last question for you, Chuck, and thank you for your time today. You talk about what are we called to do. Obviously, a lot of us are watching what's happening and it's almost like on a daily, well, not even a daily basis, almost an hourly basis in terms of some of the things that are coming out of Washington. I've talked to many people that just feel helpless. They don't necessarily know what to do. They don't know if they should call their congressman or send a letter or make a donation or, call the governor or what they should do. You're on the ground. You've got boots on the ground. You're talking to these executive directors. You're seeing some of these challenges firsthand. For the ordinary citizen, for our civic leaders, for our business leaders, for those community leaders that might hear this episode, what's the one thing that you would tell them they should go do that could address this issue or at least support the issue?
Well, I would start with, we have all got to wake up every day and you know in the Christian faith, we would say ground our hearts in God, like find somewhere to just center who you are. Like if we wake up and just simply respond to everything out there, man, that's just not sustainable. So we try and help folks to really just take a breath, ground ourselves in God and our faith or whatever it is that motivates us. It is super important to get accurate information. And it's tough right now because there's just so much flying around, but we're committed to figuring that out and doing our best to discern what are the material impacts in this current moment. And then we, as an organization, just by nature of the role that we play, are checking in with our partners. And so, just like in the early days of the pandemic, we are serving a bit as as that maven, as a hub of what's going on around here. And so, not to plug our own stuff, but we do, on our website, if you go to the contact page, you can receive a weekly email from us, and we're doing our darndest to really portray what is it like on the ground around here. Where do we need to deploy our human resources for the good of our community, both in an immediate sense and in, clearly we're likely going to be shifting quite a bit around. And so what are the conversations that are being had around those ends? So yeah, ground our hearts in God, really try and get accurate information as tough as that is right now, and check in with people that are doing the work on the ground to figure out how you can engage and support them.
Chuck, thank you for locking in with me, but even more importantly, thank you for the important and critical work that you're doing day to day to support our nonprofit community and support the people in our community that are the most vulnerable and the most exposed to some of the things that are happening right now during this current time. And to my audience, I want you to listen carefully to what Chuck told you. Don't waste your energy. You got to make sure that you're using your energy and directing your energy to something that you know that you can have an influence over. Make sure that you also don't become apathetic, that you don't completely disengage from everything that's going on right now. This is a time that we need everyone in our community to be paying close attention and to actually care more about your neighbor than maybe you care about yourself. As always, thank y'all for locking in with me. Make sure you stay tuned to WTOB because every Sunday morning, that is where the Locked In Show broadcasts. But if you happen to miss me there, you can always get me wherever you download and subscribe to your favorite podcast, whether that's Apple, Spotify, Pandora, wherever you get your favorite podcast. You can always lock in there. And until next time, y'all stay locked in.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode on the Triad Podcast Network. Our mission is simple: provide information, advice, and stories about the people and places that make the North Carolina Triad such a great place to be. You can find us by searching Triad Podcast Network on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much wherever you like to listen. If you like what you heard and want to support the show and those that contribute, we would truly appreciate a rating and review on your favorite podcast app. It helps spread the word along, as do your shares on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram @Triad Podcast. To get in touch with us, simply email info@triadpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.
This is the Triad Podcast Network.